We are now on the 20th day of the war, and if you think this war will end in just a few days, you better think again. Since our last update, the U.S.-Israeli coalition carried out an attack that is probably one of the most significant in the entire campaign, aside from the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on the first day. In the early morning of March 17th, an Israeli strike killed Ali Larijani, who was considered the mastermind behind the brutal crackdown earlier this year, and who had been almost entirely controlling the country's movements since the war broke out. Meanwhile, Iran's response to this war has been something different. Their neighboring countries that used to support them seem to have grown tired of avoiding involvement. And now it is said that Washington is being pressured to finally put an end to Iran's threats, including destroying the tools of their oppression.
But before we start that, if you're new to our channel, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this.
Destroying the tools of repression. After the death of the Supreme Leader on February 28th, Ali Larijani was recognized as one of the most powerful people in Iran. Although there is officially a new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, his whereabouts remain a mystery. He has not been seen in public since the attacks began, and various reports have spread that he was injured, lost consciousness, or may even be gone. In his absence, the Revolutionary Guards have temporarily taken control. They are holding power. Larijani also became known for his role in the crackdown last January, where an estimated 36,500 people were killed in just 2 days. But he didn't do this alone. He was assisted by Gholamreza Soleimani, the commander of the Basij, a feared paramilitary force spread throughout communities, mosques, and universities across the country. The two of them are considered the main reason why the Islamic Republic remained intact in the midst of the crisis. But in the early hours of March 17th, both of them were killed in an Israeli strike. In any situation, this is a huge blow, but it became even more critical because of the timing. Since the war began, the U.S. and Israel have been conducting separate but simultaneous campaigns aside from the more publicized attacks on nuclear sites and missile infrastructure. The goal of this campaign is to directly destroy the regime's ability to control its own people, especially their system of repression. You can see the real objective of this operation in the targets they choose. Destroying the missile launchers weakens Iran's ability to retaliate, but destroying law enforcement stations and their leaders further weakens the government's ability to control the country, which they have already struggled to maintain. But there's an important reminder here before we start thinking that the regime is about to collapse just because of these two strikes. Since the attacks began, members of the IRGC and Basij have spread out into civilian areas. According to reports, Soleimani was even hiding in a paramilitary tent camp when he was hit. In addition, the structure of their organization in the provinces was specifically designed to handle this kind of crisis. They have semi-autonomous units that can operate even if the central command is lost. So yes, the loss of their leaders and infrastructure has a significant impact. But this doesn't mean that the remaining members no longer have the capability to continue their operations. Whether all of this is enough, that's the question that may be answered very soon. At the time of this recording, the Chahar Shanbe Suri is taking place, a traditional fire-jumping festival that is thousands of years old. Despite the government's warning, many Iranians go out into the streets, light bonfires, and set off fireworks as a symbol of celebration. According to initial reports, gatherings are widespread throughout the country, but at the same time, the crackdown has also begun, especially in the Chekar district in the western part of Iran. There are also videos circulating of continuous gunfire as security forces try to drive people away from the bonfire areas. There are also undercover agents who immediately make arrests right on the spot. The situation is the same in Karaj and Mashhad, where clashes between people and authorities have also been reported. We will keep an eye on what happens next, but the real test is yet to come in the following days. Because on March 20th, Nowruz, the Persian New Year, is celebrated. This is one of the biggest gatherings in Iran, and it often becomes the center of protests against the government. Last year, dozens of people were arrested in different provinces while this event was being held. And that happened even before the current crisis broke out. This year, the situation is very different. We can't say that this will be the make or break moment, but it's clear that this is a big challenge to the coalition's plan. Their theory is that if you weaken the government's ability to suppress, the people themselves will act to overthrow it. This is the way they think they can bring down the Islamic Republic without having to send ground troops like what happened in Iraq. But the problem is the people who hold power on the ground, the armed forces, have a different perspective. And this was clear in what happened in early March. President Pezeshkian apologized to the Gulf states for the uncontrolled missile launches against them. At first glance, this seemed like the right move, especially since those countries were not directly attacking Iran. But that's not what happened. He was ignored by the IRGC, and the attacks on Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, and other places in the region continued. According to the report, some of them were even angry because it seemed like the president backed down from the fight. This is significant inside Iran. The Revolutionary Guards are not just a simple military force. This is a group driven by ideology. Hardliners who are willing to do anything to preserve the Islamic Republic, no matter the cost. So whatever happens on the streets of Iran, it seems these armed forces won't easily give in. A tough neighbor. The strong stance of the IRGC not only showed the dynamics of power in Iran, it also changed the position of the entire region in a way that was hard to imagine just a few weeks ago. Before the war began, the Gulf states were Iran's closest allies against possible military action. Even though there are U.S. bases on their territory, they strongly prevented the White House from attacking Iran and actively tried to find a compromise between Washington and Iran to avoid conflict. Part of this was for their own security because they knew that turmoil in the region would not be good for their economy, even in the short term. But despite this, they are still among Iran's remaining friends. For example, the UAE spent many years repairing its relationship with Iran, and Oman's foreign minister was in Washington to discuss the situation with Vice President J.D. Vance a day before the attacks. None of them doubt that Iran poses a threat, which is why they have U.S. bases. But in their calculation, it's better to deal with the threat from Iran than to be almost defenseless in a war. But within almost 72 hours from Operation Epic Fury, everything changed. Since February 28th, Iran has launched more than 1,800 projectiles consisting of ballistic missiles and drones, especially targeting the UAE. The Fujairah Oil Industrial Zone, one of the largest oil storage facilities in the Middle East, was hit, with pipelines built to avoid the Strait of Hormuz. In Dubai, the national airport was affected due to a drone strike near the fuel tanks. There were flight delays and passengers could be seen running amid the smoke and chaos. The scene was nearly identical across the Middle East. Although U.S. air defenses intercept most of the missiles and drones sent by Iran, some still managed to get through. But even more remarkable is the reaction in the Gulf capitals over the past few days. Perhaps the most surprising event was when ABC Australia interviewed the Emirati Minister for International Cooperation, Riyad al-Hashimi, which went viral because she called the attacks almost unhinged since they targeted civilian infrastructure. When the interviewer pointed out that the U.S. and Israel started the war and that the Emirates were targeted because they have U.S. bases, al-Hashimi did not beat around the bush. Regardless of how this started, the real issue is the retaliatory measures taken by Iran against the Gulf states. Our relationship with the United States does not break during times of crisis. We do not give in to intimidation, and Bahrain was even harsher, calling Iran a traitor. They also led in supporting a UN Security Council resolution that condemned Iran for their targets in this war, which passed with unusually strong support. While not every Gulf state is as firm in its stance as al-Hashimi, they are all moving in the same direction. The GCC formally organized this shift, using Article 51 of the UN Charter regarding collective self-defense, and clearly left open the option to respond with military force. But behind the public statements calling for peace, the private message to Washington is more direct. Finish the job. Officials from the Gulf states are pressuring the Trump administration to completely weaken Iran's ability to threaten their infrastructure. Officials directly call for peace by demanding the regime's collapse. They clearly want the job done. Officials are pushing for peace. Messages to end peace, direct private messages from peace officials, work. Officials want to finish. Officials are pushing for peace, finish the job. Gulf states are for peace. Direct private officials, direct private messages to Washington, finish it. Private messages to Washington are pushing for peace, but also to further destroy Iran's military capabilities. By almost any standard, this is one of the most self-defeating foreign policy decisions made in the modern Middle East. The choke point: if the diplomatic picture is bad for Iran, it's even more felt in the economy, where this war is really biting others. The choke point: the Strait of Hormuz, where almost 20 million barrels of oil pass through every day, is the most fiercely contested waterway in the world. By most accounts, there is almost no conventional Iranian navy left. Most of their fleet has been destroyed or sunk by American and Israeli strikes. But that doesn't mean passing ships are safe, because the assets causing damage are not the large ships. The IRGC continues to fire from shore-based anti-ship missile batteries along the coast near Bandar Abbas and Keshem Island. And it's very difficult to deal with swarms of fast attack speedboats and Shahed-style drones using only an air campaign because they're very easy to hide until they're launched. In addition, the regime's messaging about all of this has been extremely contradictory, which has only caused more confusion. In his first public statement, and we use the term statement loosely because there are many doubts about whether he's still alive, Mojtaba Khamenei said that blocking the Strait definitely must continue. This shows that they are ready to put everything into this move. Meanwhile, the former minister told almost the opposite story. The Strait is not closed, but is only closed to American and Israeli ships and tankers, not to others. Its effect on the economy is enormous. The price of oil around the world has risen sharply since the war broke out, and the Gulf states are at the very front line of the damage. According to a stress test by Goldman Sachs published on March 15th, if the Strait remains effectively closed until April, Qatar and Kuwait could experience a 14% contraction in their full-year GDP, the worst since the Gulf War in 1990. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, will not be as affected but will still feel the impact, at 5% and 3% respectively. However, this urgency still has not resulted in a unified international coalition, which has angered Washington. Trump requested support from 7 countries to send warships and help patrol the Strait, and he even told reporters on Air Force One, "Whether we get support or not, we will remember." In Europe, German Defense Minister Boris Repercussions reflected the mood of most of the continent. "This is not our war. We did not start it. This is the main position of Europe. This war was started by the US and Israel, and they should be the ones to handle it until the end." But the crisis does not end here. South of the Litani. While tensions continue between the US and Iran, another front is spreading between Israel and Lebanon. We have already covered this because when the fighting started just a few days after the first strikes in Iran, it led to Lebanon becoming the most volatile second front of the war. By March 16, 3 separate IDF divisions were simultaneously operating in southern Lebanon, entering Qiyam, Bint Jabil, and Maroun al-Raz. These are the largest ground operations since the 2006 intervention, with evacuation orders covering all areas in southern Litanies. When the evacuations in Bekaa Valley and southern Beirut are included, this reaches almost 14% of the entire territory of Lebanon, and nearly 1 million people have been forced to evacuate. According to Israeli Defense Minister Katz, some of the operations are modeled after Gaza. There is no timeline yet for withdrawal, and some ministers are floating the idea of a semi-permanent security zone. For now, there are no signs of an expansion of operations toward Beirut or beyond the Litani. But that doesn't mean there haven't been calls for such a move, because there have been. One senior cabinet official even dared to suggest turning the southern suburbs of Beirut into ruins. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun's response to this issue was the most remarkable thing that happened in Beirut for many years. Remember, in Lebanon, sectarian identity is at the center of almost everything that happens, especially in politics. And the LAF is considered the last cross-sectarian institution in the country. Despite this, the lack of action seriously threatens the country's sovereignty. The lesson that Israel learned from the October 7 attacks, whether right or wrong, is that they can no longer allow an enemy on their border. After the 2024 ceasefire in Lebanon, it became clear to Israel that the disarmament of Hezbollah is a minimum condition. And in the gravity of the situation, the LAF was a big help. They completed Phase 1 of the operation this year. Although progress was slow, so slow that Hezbollah could possibly rearm in other parts of the country faster than their weapons are being removed, the LAF showed that they can deliver. And the fact that until now Hezbollah continues to launch attacks against Israel doesn't make things any easier. Although their stockpile has already been significantly reduced, and it continues to decrease in their clashes with the IDF, they are still far from surrendering. We'll end here for now. But believe me, a lot more will happen as the situation continues. Thank you for watching.